you be the person who won't quit, right? Because the people that get to the top of the mountain are not always the best, fastest, strongest climbers. They're the people who are absolutely relentless about putting one foot in front of the other. They are the people who will not quit when it feels really difficult. They are the people that can dig down deep and find just a little bit more motivation to keep them going, to put one foot in front of the other when the rest of the people feel like they can't keep going.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators podcast. I'm Seth Dechtman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today is Alison Levine. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. So good to be here with you.
It really is great to be here with you. Alison, we've broken bread recently, and while you might be small in stature, you certainly have a hearty appetite. I want to get right into the meal aspect of our conversation here. If you were to put a meal together or a dish, and we had to say what ingredients were necessary to make it delicious, nutritious, and something that you'd want to have over and over again, in the context of being the most technical, the smartest, the most informed, and the most capable, versus the other attributes of grit, resilience, willfulness, what would those ingredients in that dish be?
Well, if it's a dish that's supposed to promote like success in life or success in business, if that's the kind of dish you're asking about, I wasn't sure. At first I was like, oh my God, what are my favorite recipes? Like what goes like sugar, butter. But if it's in terms of like how to, what and the pinnacle of success is of course different for each person, but I would say you be the person, like what goes into the recipe for that is you be the person who won't quit, right? Because the people that get to the top of the mountain are not always the best, fastest, strongest climbers. They're the people who are absolutely relentless about putting one foot in front of the other. They are the people who will not quit when it feels really difficult. They are the people that can dig down deep and find just a little bit more motivation to keep them going, to put one foot in front of the other when the rest of the people feel like they can't keep going.
That's really, boiled down to it. You refer to Junko Tabai in your, I think I said that right, Junko Tabai?
Junko Taibei, yes.
Junko Taibei. I'll get there one of these years. First woman to climb Everest. And I saw on a social media post where you quoted her, and this is the quote: "Technique and ability alone do not get you to the top. It is willpower that is the most important. This willpower you cannot buy with money or be given by others. It rises from your heart." Is that what you're pointing to?
I mean, yes. I mean, willpower is definitely part of it. So you have to have a lot of that, but it's also, that's a big part of it, but it's also just being willing to be okay with the discomfort, right? Because the higher you get on the mountain, the more uncomfortable you feel because you're gaining elevation, right? At the higher altitudes, you feel worse. So as you get closer to your goal, you're going to feel worse and worse and worse. And you have to be able to sit in that discomfort and to feel okay when things get really uncomfortable and know that the path forward is going to continue to be even more uncomfortable, but eventually you're going to reach your goal, right? And so you have to be the person that won't turn around when it gets really hard, when it gets really uncomfortable. That willpower is definitely part of it, but it's just the ability to be relentless in the face of discomfort and in the face of uncertainty.
What comes to mind is, and for our listeners, we're going to have in the show notes Alison's speaking profile and her bio. You led the first American women's Everest expedition. Say that 10 times fast. So when you talk about the mountain, you're talking about Everest perhaps, but you've also summited the 7 summits. And I think what comes to mind is you can't see the forest for the trees. You're up there 15, 16, 17,000 feet, 20,000 feet further. What is it? 8,000 meters. It's just incredible. And you might have another, 400 meters to go. And literally it takes everything that you have to go one step. And
Yeah,
how do you,
oftentimes you're taking one step and multiple, 5 breaths for every step because it's so hard to breathe up in what they call the death zone. So you mentioned 8,000 meters. That's about 26,000 feet. That's what they call the death zone. And they call it the death zone because at that elevation, human life can no longer be sustained. Your body is literally starting to die at that elevation. You don't want to stay up in the death zone any longer than you have to be up there. But you're taking one step and then multiple breaths. And so, even just to go a couple hundred feet, 200, 300 feet could take you hours.
yeah. And the mind game, I don't want to belittle at a game, but the mind, the messing of the mind must be, this took me everything I had in this single moment to take one step, and I still have to go all the way up there. And that internal battle, talk about that, because it's like, what do they say? The brick builder just lays bricks, but the cathedral maker knows that, it's 100,000 bricks that they're laying, and ultimately they're going to lay the last brick. Ultimately, it's going to be your last step. Another conversation is the way down, right? Getting
Right.
to the top isn't the whole story, but that must just be such a trip, right? It took everything, and words don't capture it. I'm trying to inhabit the experience. I've been up to 4,500 meters in Colorado. What's that like?
So, when you realize how long it takes you to get any decent amount of distance in at that elevation, it can feel very overwhelming. So, for example, summit day on the south side of Mount Everest, when you're coming from the Nepal side. People also climb from the Tibet side, but when you're coming from the Nepal side, your high camp is at about 26,000 feet, so 8,000 meters, so the beginning of the death zone. And you realize that you still have another 3,000 vertical feet to cover, right? Not to mention all the horizontal distance. So when you think about having to take multiple breaths for every step, that feels very overwhelming. And so for me, when I have a big goal that feels completely overwhelming, the only way I can really tackle it is by breaking it down into much smaller parts. So, for example, on Summit Day on Everest, I stopped stressing out about the summit and how long it was going to take me to get there. And I just focused on landmarks that didn't feel like they were that far away. I would take my headlamp and I would shine it on a big boulder that was down the trail. And I would think, okay, that's my goal right now. I just need to get to that boulder. That's where I'm going, just to that boulder. And then I would take my step, and 5 breaths. Step again, multiple breaths. And then I'd get to the boulder. And then once I got to that boulder, I'd find another boulder and think, okay, I'm just going to that boulder. I'm just going to that big block of ice. So for me, when I have something that feels like it's going to be a ridiculous, hairy stretch, if I break it down into much smaller modules, it feels a lot more doable that way and a lot less overwhelming. So that's what I have to do with big goals, like getting to the summit. Break it down into smaller parts. And then every time I would get to a big, the big boulder I was staring at, that would build my confidence. And I would think, okay, well, I made it to this big boulder. Now maybe I can make it to that one over there. All right, now that I'm at this one, maybe I can make it to one more. And so every time I would reach another little landmark, I thought, okay, I made it to this one. I can do this again. So it's just a way to build confidence. And I'm going to quote a friend of mine, Leslie Blodgett, who was the founder of the makeup company Bare Minerals. She has a book that I love. It's called Pretty Good Advice, and which is a great play on pretty, in the makeup
Yes.
beauty industry. But she says, all these people talk about setting these really high goals, and that's great. She said, but when I have a goal, she said, I like to set my goals a bit lower so I know I can reach them. I set the bar lower. That's what she said. I set the bar lower so I can reach it. And then the next time I set the bar a little bit higher. And then the next time I set the bar a little bit higher. And pretty soon I built a ladder and I can climb as high as I want to go. So I love that analogy where she talks about building the ladder. You have to have a healthy sense of failure tolerance for sure when you're going to try big things. But when you achieve the smaller things, that helps you build the confidence to know that you can achieve the big thing.
Yeah. Success begets success,
Yes.
memorializing that, even if it's that one step or that next rock where your headlamp shines on it. How does that aspect of a milestone that's attainable inside of the bigger goal. How do you fold that into your leadership style? You're leading these expeditions. There's an added responsibility, safety, risk management. There's a lot to manage on top of the physical well-being of everybody. How does that play out?
Well, I think there's a few things that go into that. First is I'm going to use an example from one of my mentors over the years, a great climber, an incredible guide named Vern Tejas. I learned so much from this guy about leadership when I would climb with him. But Vern Tejas I don't even know how many times he's done the seven summits now. I can't even count. Multiple times he's done the seven summits.
And
He
I mean,
also
look,
did
can we just take a Tenzing Norgay, Vern, what's his name?
Vern Tejas.
Vern Teat, Junko Tabai. I mean, these names, they're just on their own. They're incredible names.
Yeah, so Vern did the first winter solo climb of Denali in Alaska. He's an incredible guide, but something that really stuck with me was when I was climbing with him on Mount Elbrus in Russia. And it was one of the first mountains I'd ever been to. I think the second mountain I'd ever been to in my life. And it's the highest peak in Europe. And I was really struggling with the weight in my pack and my quads were burning and I was exhausted and I was struggling with the altitude and we stopped for a break and Vern said, "How's everybody doing?" And everybody was chiming in, doing great, feeling good, feeling good." And I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? My quads are screaming. I'm struggling to breathe. My lungs hurt. I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm running out of steam. And it made me start thinking, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm not good enough for this. Maybe I shouldn't be here because everyone's saying how great they're doing and I'm really struggling. So everyone chimes in, "Oh, doing great, let's go." And Vern said, "Okay, I guess I'm the only one whose quads are screaming and who's feeling this altitude headache." And when he said that he was having a hard time, when he was struggling with it, and look, he's such an elite climber. I'm sure he really wasn't struggling at that point, but now that I know him better and I've been on more mountains with him, but the fact that he said, "This is really hard for me," made me feel better because I thought, okay, this is supposed to be hard. It's hard for everybody. It's not just me who's struggling. And so then I became okay with feeling exhausted and spent and my lungs hurt and my head hurt. I just had to learn to feel okay with that because I thought this is normal. And if guys like Vern have screaming quads and banging headaches, then I'm doing just fine. And
Yeah.
so it was just a great lesson about, they call it that term, there's that term toxic positivity, right? Where everybody's just, oh, everything's great and everything's perfect and I'm feeling great and I'm doing
Yeah.
great and I'm achieving so much and I've had nothing but success. And, it's a great lesson in that you should allow yourself to feel the struggle. You should allow
Right.
yourself to feel the pain, allow yourself to feel the discomfort, right? When you feel those things, you know you're human and you know you're normal. And so for Vern to point out that feeling all this stuff is just part of the process gave me the confidence to know I do belong here. I can do this. And what I'm feeling is very normal instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so uncomfortable. Maybe I'm not cut out for that. So that was just,
And
one of the great leadership lessons I learned from him.
and you talked about the discomfort and being uncomfortable and that if you can inhabit that, I guess, as part of it, even if you're, an elite performer in mountaineering like you or Vern, it doesn't mean that it's a piece of cake and a walk in the park, pardon the metaphor. It's quite the contrary. I mean, any elite athlete, I'm thinking, I love tennis. They train, they're fit. I'll use the pun, rarefied air, but it's still hard in the fifth set at 5-all at deuce. It's not, hey, this is no problem. Let me have a martini and I'll take a break. I think what's brilliant about that share is that anecdote is that if Vern consciously had the awareness to read the room, if you will, and say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Whether he was really burning quads or not, and let's just say he was, but it was like this hyper conscious awareness to say, wait a minute, I need to create I need to decompress the space here. They shouldn't feel pressured. Everybody feel perfect, now, as opposed to waiting for a more critical dynamic moment that you could actually be in trouble.
And I was the only woman in the group, so it was all men. And I'm pretty small, as you know. So I'm about 5 foot 410 pounds. And so I see these big guys who are 6 foot 2, 6 foot 4, 220 pounds, a foot taller than me, twice my weight. And they can carry a pack. 30 pounds is a lot more for me to carry 30 pounds is a lot more exhausting than somebody who's a foot taller than me and twice
Sure.
my weight. And 30 pounds is a much smaller percentage of their body weight, and they can move faster. And I would look at these guys with these long legs and these big lungs and these strong, these big, strong guys and thinking, oh my gosh, how am I gonna climb alongside them? And how am I gonna be as strong as they are? And I realized I don't have to be as strong as they are. I just have to be as strong as I can be. And I just have to be the person that will not quit. Because there were a couple of guys in our group that didn't get to the summit of Mount Elbrus. We had, unfortunately, a couple of injuries, a dislocated knee and a broken ankle.
Oh,
Two different
you
guys on the
know,
trip. But
just a day in the office, right?
yeah, well, the funny thing is the first guy dislocated his knee, and he was the biggest guy on our team.
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh my god, how are we gonna get this guy down?" Well, and this is about, like, talk about, like, innovation and figuring out how to do what you need to do with the resources you have at the time, because sometimes you're not gonna get any more resources, right? In the business world too. No more money, no more resources, you gotta make it work with what you have. So, this guy dislocated his knee. Vern taught us how. He's like, "Take off your jackets." We took off our Gore-Tex jackets and we used our Gore-Tex jackets and our trekking poles to make a stretcher for this guy out of our poles and Gore-Tex jackets. So we
Mm.
made a stretcher so we could get Lewis down. And as we were carrying him down, one of the other guys on our team managed to break his ankle. So now we have
Oh,
two guys that we have to get down. But it was just another great lesson from Vern is you have the resources you have to make them work. Be creative. Look, what do you have around you that you can use,
yeah,
right? When you need support. What do
yeah,
you already have? Instead of just saying, I don't have what I need. Oh, we don't have a stretcher, we're screwed. No, we
yeah.
got to figure this out. You can figure it out. You can with usually with the resources you have at the time.
Well, there's a great through line here where, first your leader gave permission to people to not be this toxic positivity, which is just, a great leader creating a culture or a space or an environment or an ambiance where truth can be told. It reminds me, when I've seen you speak about the importance of ego in your journey. Expand, share with our listeners how embracing ego has benefited you and your leadership experiences.
So I am so glad you brought that up because it's one of my favorite things to talk about because it's sort of counterintuitive to what most people think about ego. So this was really, I have to credit Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, who wrote the forward for my book. This is something I learned from Coach K. So I was fortunate enough to serve on the board of the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at Duke University for a couple of years. So I got to interact with Coach K a bit. And I remember it was this breakfast that our board had with him when he was coaching the US national basketball team, right? He was coaching our men's Olympic basketball team. They brought home
Woohoo!
several gold medals. Yeah, really an amazing team, an incredible coach. And he was talking about what he looks for when he's recruiting a team because I thought, how are you going to figure that out, right? You have this big pool of professional, talented NBA players to pull from. How does he figure out who he wants on the court at the Olympics? And he had a really interesting answer. He said that when he's thinking about who he wants on a team, what he looks for is ego. And I initially thought, well, of course, because you don't want those guys. You gotta weed out the ego. You gotta be all about the team. Leave your ego at the door. I'm with you. And he said, no, you want ego. And I was like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. I've read so many management leadership books that talk about you don't want big egos. And what he said really did make sense when he explained it. He said that when he's putting together an Olympic team, There's two kinds of ego that he looks for. The first kind is what he calls performance ego. And he said, I want people who are good and who know that they're good, right? He said, I need LeBron James to be LeBron James when he comes out onto the court. I don't want him to be a wuss. I want him to be out there with all the LeBron James, energy and confidence that he always has. Now, having a strong that sense of performance ego, like I'm good and I know that I'm good. It doesn't mean you treat people poorly. It doesn't mean you're arrogant. It just means you're good and you know that you're good, right? And I thought, okay, when I'm looking for teams that I want to climb a mountain with, I want people with that sense of performance ego. I don't want people who are going to get to the mountain and think, my gosh, this looks really high now that we're here. You want people who are thinking, I've got this. I've got this. So that's performance ego. And then the other kind of ego that Coach K talks about that he looks for is, I think, even more important. And this is what he calls team ego. He said, I want people on my team who are going to be proud to be a part of something that collectively feels more important than the individuals alone, right? That name on the front of the uniform, the Team USA, is more important than the name on the back of the uniform, the individual name. And that makes so much sense to me because when you're climbing a big mountain, you want people who are skilled and experienced, but who are also going to be really good team players because it doesn't do you any good to be high up on Mount Everest or any mountain with the best climbers if they don't care about the team.
Yeah, it's such a great, you're right. Counterintuitive is probably the best way to capture how that is. And so many leaders are leave the ego at the door. It's all about the team. Many minds are better than one, and that might be true, but we got to count on you, and we got to count on you to be you and to show up in all your LeBronness or whomever it
And to
is.
have the skills, right? Because you also don't want to be up on Mount Everest with somebody who's really team oriented and just fun and cool and easy to get along
Right.
with if they don't have the skills to be successful in that environment, right? So you need both. You need a strong, strong performer and somebody who's also going to be very focused on the team.
Yeah, and that has to do with, you also talk about, the adaptability and the resilience. So whilst we're on a team, there might be the time where we'll use LeBron as an example, where he might have to pass as opposed to take the shot, and somebody else needs to step up because they're doubling LeBron and somebody else is open and they can't be afraid. I'll just hold the ball and play it safe. They need to be able to take the shot as well. Coach K is brilliant. He not only turned that program around, but the leader of leaders, to be able to have those egos that he pulled towards them and harvested their egos, if you will, in a way where let them expand and be who they are. What a way, because he's saying to himself, I have enough of an ego where I'm going to manage and lead this group as well, because I can do it. And I know I can do it. And I'm going to step in and do it when I need to. I want to shift gears a little bit, Alison. Your book, On the Edge, Leadership Lessons from Everest and Other Extreme Environments. In the book, you draw parallels between mountaineering and business. And, again, when I went and read the book, what spoke to me was the through line was these leadership principles that not only apply to the world of mountaineering, but to the worlds in corporate America, in the business world. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, throughout the whole book really is, lessons I learned in the mountains in various extreme environments, whether it's Antarctica, skiing to the South Pole, whatever, all those lessons I've learned from these extreme environments and how they apply to everyday challenges in the business world and in your personal life. So there's a couple that I'll bring up really quickly. One is about managing fear, right? Because the world today is incredibly unpredictable. And when there's a lot of unpredictability and uncertainty and ambiguity, that tends to produce like fear and anxiety in people. And what I really learned in the environments that I've been in is that fear is okay. Fear is just a normal human emotion. Complacency is what will kill you, right? Even when you feel this fear, you have to be able to act and react quickly when you're in environments that are constantly shifting and changing. And so Fear's fine. Let yourself feel fear. Just don't let it paralyze you. You have to keep going in the face of fear. And I remind people all the time that you can be scared and brave at the same time. You can be scared and brave at the same time. So you have to learn how to manage fear when you're in these ever changing, constantly shifting environments. And then another one that I think is so important is learning how to redefine progress. So when you're climbing Mount Everest, you actually don't just get to base camp and climb to camp one and climb to camp two and climb to camp three and climb to camp four and go to the summit. People think you just climb up the mountain, and that's actually not how it works. You spend about 10 days trekking into base camp. And then once you get there, you move up to the higher camps one at a time, but you go to camp one and then you come back down to base camp again. And then you spend a few days at base camp because this is all about letting your body get used to the altitude very slowly. So you go down to base camp again. Then you climb to camp one again for a second time. And then you climb to camp two. And then you come back down to base camp again. Spend more time at base camp. And then you climb to camp one, climb to camp two, climb to camp three, 24,000 feet above sea level, back down to base camp again. And so it's very physically challenging, of course, to be going up and down and up higher and back down. Psychologically, it's also very, very challenging because the summit is this way and you are spending a lot of time climbing this way. And you might think that you're losing ground or you're not making progress because you're climbing in the opposite direction from where you're trying to eventually get to. But when you're down climbing back to base camp, that is how your body gains strength, right? When you're at the lower elevation, you can eat, sleep, hydrate more easily, regain strength. Your body is deteriorating at the higher elevations, and you can get stronger when you're down at base camp. So while you're going in the wrong direction, you are actually making progress because you're helping your body acclimatize. And for whatever reason, we always think progress has to happen in one direction. So the book really helps you redefine progress. Sometimes progress doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes progress doesn't feel like progress, but it's still progress. Sometimes you do have to go backwards in order to eventually get to where you want to be. So actually have a phrase that I've trademarked, which is that backing up is not the same as backing down. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to back up. That is not defeat. That is your opportunity to gain some strength so you're
Yeah.
better out of the gates the next time.
It's like a reset, recontextualize, a restart, a recalibrate. I love that, and I love that phrase. I think of your students. I know you're a faculty at the Thayer Leadership Group, and you also spent, I think, 4 years at West Point in the Department of Behavioral Sciences.
Thank
But
you.
the acknowledgement of being the recipient in 2019 of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor and being acknowledged and recognized for your individual accomplishments in your field and inspiring service for our nation. I know you worked with, was it Governor Schwarzenegger? You were deputy finance director on his successful bid to become the governor. You've worked on Wall Street. Talk a little bit about what it's like to get that acknowledgement and how you feel to receive such prestigious recognition. How does it impact your future endeavors?
Well, I mean, I think when you read this, like, who is that guy talking about? It doesn't, I still have imposter syndrome like anybody else does. And I try to quiet those voices and just kind of feel proud of what I've accomplished. But I also think that, you can look at all these accomplishments of mine or of anybody else's. But I really think the most important thing that we do, and this is, something we do every single day, we can do every day if we focus on it. Something we can do every day that doesn't require any special gear or training or budget. I think the most important thing we can do in our lifetime is just encourage the people around us and to just be an encourager and be the person who can give somebody a boost of confidence or a lift when they are struggling or when they are feeling down. And we can all win big awards and climb big mountains and be recognized. And it is so amazing and humbling to be recognized for these things and to have, been asked to be on the part time faculty at West Point and to win the Ellis Island Medal of Honor. But the stuff that has the most impact are the personal interactions that we have every single day. A few kind words of encouragement shared with somebody who's having a tough time can completely change the outcome of a situation for somebody, can completely change somebody's life. And like I said, these are things we can do every single day. And just a few kind words shared with somebody can be life changing. And so while I do feel so honored to have won these awards and to get these acknowledgments, I just feel like the most important thing is like the day-to-day human interaction that we have has the ability to have so much impact. And so I really want people watching or listening to remember that you have the ability every single day to impact somebody's life by simply being kind to them and sharing some encouragement, and to remember that not everybody reaches out when they're struggling. It's not always apparent when somebody is having a tough time. So just proactively be that person, be that encourager, because you never know whose life you might completely change with a few kind words.
It's something that I feel I do naturally. I've lived overseas. I've shared a lot of my personal story with you when we've been together. And I think Americans have a reputation. We have a reputation for a lot of things, but one of the things is we have the Nike just do it, a can do, anything is possible mentality. That has a double-edged sword, but there is an over encouragement. I coach professionally overseas sports, and there's different styles, and a pat on the back doesn't work in every culture. But I will say that connecting that encouragement it can be the spark, the kindling, the right amount of fuel, the right dose of press on the accelerator to get somebody unstuck or moving in a little bit slightly different direction. I want to shift gears completely before we finish here. You shared with me, you grew up in a great family. And I want to know both sides, specifically your mother and your father. Speak to individually. What would you say to mothers for their daughters, their sons, their children out there in terms of that encouragement and going for it?
Well, I would say I grew up in a great family in terms of learning a lot about tough love. Both my parents suffered from extreme mental illness. My father is bipolar, on and off medications throughout his life. And so there's a lot to like unpack there. So I kind of feel like I've been a parent my whole life. Even as a child, like have been a parent trying to take care of my parents. My mom
Sure.
suffered from extreme depression and had trouble even just like turning on lights or coming out of her room. And so I still feel like I grew up in a great family because it taught me so much about resilience and responsibility, taking care of myself, and just kind of growing up in a tough love family. Like it wasn't always easy, but there was always, even with like the mental illness and the challenges with that, there was just so much love in the family. So I just feel like I learned how to understand people who are in a different space than I'm in, because I'm just like naturally a positive, upbeat person, and just learning that everybody is so different in the way that they express themselves and the way that they express love. But I think that growing up with two parents that suffered from extreme mental illness helped me have a lot of compassion and empathy for people who are struggling.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I didn't want to put you on the spot. I just know, I feel this way. But my father died when I was very, very young. There was a lot of tumult, a lot of chaos, a lot of turbulence, if you will. And now, farther down the track of life, it's the gift that I was able to live through those difficult times, not at, 12 years old going, God, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to be so much stronger and develop myself later on in life to have these great skill set. But, they brought us into this world, you know, conditions are what conditions are, people are who they are, but the gifts keep expanding. And, I just appreciate you being open and willing and unopposed to sharing
I
that.
think it's what like taught me so much about tenacity and just no whining, no crying, no complaining. You just get through it. Like you just find the strength to get through it. So I think that's what was a advantage to that. And then also, like I said, just learning about like everybody has their challenges and learning how
Right.
to relate to people where they are, right? And not expecting people to adjust to what the type of communication that you want, like figure out who they are, what are their challenges, and meet them where they are.
And that is, I'm just reminded of, and it might just be because it's so fresh in my mind, and I've said this now 3 or 4 times. We were together recently in Hawaii, in Kauai. It was beautiful. But the stunning imagery that you use in your keynotes and the anecdotes that really bring forth the vividness of the experience are, albeit now so in the past, if you will, not to take any merit away from the accomplishment, but that the lessons are evergreen. So whether it's from a home where you had to be the parent, maybe when you didn't want to or didn't understand, to today, looking back on the lessons learned from being at base camp or crossing the Lhotse face or building a stretcher out of Gore-Tex coats or, hurtling across Antarctica on skis. These are things that, people that attend your keynotes take away and can inhabit the lessons and then deploy them immediately, and it makes a difference. And it's just brilliant to have you on this podcast. I feel like we're richer for it. We've come to the end of this part of the podcast. We'll bring you back. I know you're working on a lot of different things. I don't want to take the cat out of the bag, but there's some really exciting stuff that you're working on. Maybe we can revisit it later on and talk
Love
about
to.
how that experience was.
Yeah, I'd love to come back again. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so great. So much fun to catch up with you, after seeing you in Hawaii. And just thank you for the opportunity to share all of this with your viewers and listeners.
You're very welcome. And to our viewers and listeners, thanks for coming back and listening. For those first timers, we appreciate you joining in. Share with your family, your fellow mountaineers, adventurers, trekkers, bike riders, dog walkers, pharmacist, grocer, butcher, whoever, and have them come and join us on the Keynote Curators podcast because they're going to be smarter for it. We'll see you next time.